Welcome to our 5th annual seminar. My name is Simon Hampton-Matthews and I was elected to lead RATS in November last year. This is our agenda for the evening, and we're going to give you 4 short presentations about current topics of interest, and we'll then have a very brief look at some projects we're working on, followed by an opportunity for questions and answers. For those of you online, please use the Q&A button to raise a question. And we hope, to save you asking the question, we hope a recording will be available later. In the early 1950s, the CA formed the Cruising Committee to deal with non-geographic information. Around the turn of this century, the Cruising Committee of the Cruising Association, which is a mouthful and I'm surprised I got it out, rebranded itself as the Regulations and Technical Services Group, or RATS for short. We tweaked the name a couple of years ago to Regulatory and Technical Services. The name change more accurately reflects our areas of responsibilities. The catchy acronym RATS and the group members' willingness to be called a RAT has led to our name being widely known, not only within the CA, but in the wider marine community. Our aim is to improve cruising for everyone, and as we endeavour to achieve it through research, representation and communication. There are currently 15 full RATs and 5 reservists. All our CA members and our volunteers giving their time freely for the benefit of others. The full RATs actively participate in several projects and areas. The reservists tend to concentrate on single topics, or are past RATs who just like to keep in touch, chipping in occasionally. We work collaboratively, and a big part of our way of working is through constructive criticism. Everything we publish, from articles and web pages to answers to members' questions, undergoes peer review, and we feel that adds to the quality of our output. On the regulatory front, we deal with UK and EU-wide legislation, tax and entry and exit procedures. The EU rules permit member states to adopt local rules and laws governing implementation of the central rules. RATs don't have this local knowledge and bow to the wealth of expertise within the CA's cruising sections to understand, publish details and advise members about local laws and customs. The CA is asked to respond to many consultations on things such as wind farms, marine protected areas and harbour regulations. These are all handled by RATs. We also raise points of concern with UK and EU bodies on topics such as VAT implementation, electronic charts for navigation and marking of lobster pots and much more. Under the technical heading, we research and write articles that are published in Cruising, the CA's quarterly magazine. And examples are radar reflectors, man overboard devices, safely connecting to 32 amp shore power, and what to do with boats that have reached their end of life. We also post these articles and sometimes further technical background on the CA's member-only web pages. Some of these projects are completed quickly, others gestate over a period of months or even years. If you're not a member of the CA, we'd love you to join us. Here's a discount code for to use as a thank you for joining us this evening. All of our work, and including this presentation, is covered by the CA's disclaimer, which is shown here. We provide guidance to members and always try to get it right. However, if you have a lot hanging on the subject, you should consult an appropriate professional, such as a surveyor, lawyer, or an accountant. I'll now hand over to Tania, who's going to give you an overview about travelling with pets. Tania.
Thank you, Simon. Taking your pet with you can increase your enjoyment of cruising. Pets can come on holiday with you. There's no kennel or cattery fees to worry about. They're great company, and dogs in particular are great walking companions when you get to your destinations. And included in pets are ferrets, and these 2 lucky pair were actually rescued by the RNLI from being cut off on the rocks by the tide in Northumberland. But anyway, enough of the cute pictures, because I'm here tonight to talk to you about the rules and regulations of travelling with pets. And the first thing I want to say it's very complex. When I started preparing this talk, I thought, well, a few passports, a few vaccinations, job done. But the reality is that where we are likely to cruise from and to, we have to cross borders, and a lot of the borders have different regulations. So I'm going to talk to you about those regulations and at the same time give you some examples of where these come into play. So this will include looking at pet passports, health certificates, microchipping, health requirements, ports of entry, and approved travel routes. Well, if you don't know what all of these things are, then hopefully you will in 10 minutes' time. Before I start as well, a little geography lesson here, because we're going to talk about Great Britain, and I need to distinguish that from being United Kingdom. So Great Britain is basically Scotland, England, and Wales without Northern Ireland. The United Kingdom includes Northern Ireland, and then the British Isles are collectively all of the islands, including Ireland, the total of Ireland, and the Isle of Man. So, first of all, the good news, because if you're traveling with your pet from Great Britain, the Isle of Man, or between, and the Channel Islands, and you're entering from Northern Ireland with your pet, there are no pet documents or health requirements for travel, and you can take your pet on your boat with you. There is one small change that's happened, well, it's going to happen from the 4th of June 2025, and that's if you're taking your pet to Northern Ireland from Great Britain. So whilst we're there, let's have a quick look at what that means for us. So there is going to be a new simple pet travel document. To get this document, your pets must be microchipped, but there's no rabies vaccination required. And this document also includes a declaration that you will not take your pet into the EU via the Republic of Ireland. So they're going to let you into Northern Ireland as long as you're not going to go on into the Republic of Ireland. And if you do, you would need to follow the entry requirements for the EU. It's going to be either a digital document or a paper document, so very modern, and it's going to be free, which nearly nothing is free in this world, so that's great news. And you will get it within 5 working days of receipt of the application. As a failsafe as well, this document can be applied for at the port. So if you get to the port with your pet and you've forgotten to do this, you can actually do it before you travel from the port. It's going to last the lifetime of a pet, and you'll need 1 per pet to travel. And the applications will be able to be made from April this year. So that's a little bit of news, and hopefully good news, although currently you don't have to do anything to take your pet to Northern Ireland from Great Britain. But there was a threat going back to Brexit that Northern Ireland is in the EU, and we'd have to follow the EU regulations. So we've gone back a bit, and then we've now settled into this scheme, which sounds very good to me. Conversely, if you want to travel from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, there are no documents or pet health requirements. So this is my first example of where just because you go one way and you follow the requirements, you're not necessarily going to have the same requirements on the way back. So if you want to take your pet from Great Britain to the EU, or actually from any third country into the EU, you must enter through a traveller's point of entry. And this is different from a point of entry, which is for people and goods only. So because you're effectively bringing a pet in, it has to be a TPE. And there are less TPEs than there are points of entry. But the good news is that you can take your pet into the EU on your boat via a TPE. But you must have the required documentation. So these are the documents required for going into the EU. But the first thing that's really important to note is that since Brexit, EU pet passports issued in Great Britain are not valid for travel into the EU. So now, if you want to go to the EU from Great Britain, you have to have an animal health certificate. And it's pretty similar requirements, actually. So your pet, for this certificate, your pet must be microchipped and vaccinated against rabies. And this vaccination must be at least 21 days prior to travel. And your pet must be 12 weeks old in order to have their first rabies jab. It must be signed by an official vet. So not every vet in Great Britain can sign these. So you need to be sure that your vet is actually able to sign these certificates. And they must be issued no more than 10 days before traveling to the EU. So that's so that the vet can sign that the pet is in good health, currently in good health. The downside of these certificates is they're valid for one trip only, whereas an EU passport is valid for the lifetime of the pet. And as I said, it must be issued 10 days before you travel. So if you're planning your travel and you're not quite sure when you're leaving, or you get a big weather system coming through and it delays you, this could be really tricky for you. It's also valid, it would be valid for you if you want to do onward travel within the EU or Northern Ireland for 4 months after the date of issue. And you can also use it to come back to Great Britain for 4 months after the date of issue. And up to 5 pets may be included in this animal health certificate. Now, these are not free. Depending on the vet that you go to, it may cost you between £100 and £300. And you have to do that for every trip. Okay. So assuming we've got all of that sorted out and you're on your way. So one of the Cruising Association on their website advised that you contact border control at your chosen port of entry and ask what they require. And normally they'll respond and say, within 24 hours of your arrival, can you please send your animal health certificate, the vaccination record, and the microchip certificate? So having those with you will be really important. You'll then need to visit border control when you arrive and clear formalities, which is usually very straightforward because you've warned them in advance of your arrival. Just one word to mention on that, because I did say that you can travel with your pet on your own private boat, but this is an example of where that might be difficult, because if you're traveling to the Republic of Ireland, if you go to any of the TPEs, they're all ferry terminals with no yacht facilities. So you can't physically go to a TPE by yacht. And so therefore, going to the Republic of Ireland is only legally possible on a commercial ferry with your pet. So that's going. What about coming back? Well, this is another example. Oh, hang on, I've got to tell you the good news first. So when you return to Great Britain from Northern Ireland, Channel Islands, and the Isle of Man, you don't need any documentation. And there's no requirement to use the approved route. And I'll come on to what approved routes are in a minute. From any of these countries, and also from the Republic of Ireland, you don't need to use an approved route. And essentially this means that you can bring your pet on board your private boat from these above locations. However, returning to Great Britain from the EU is a whole different story. And this isn't new. So we've looked at one thing that's just about to come from Northern Ireland. we've looked at what changed in Brexit, but actually this has been in place since 2014. So those of you that have already travelled with pets will be aware of this. But you will need to come back to Great Britain. You'll need your passport, the pet passport, or an animal health certificate. Or if you've overstayed your 4 months on your animal health certificate, you can apply for a GB pet health certificate. In addition to that, you need to make sure that your pet has received tapeworm treatment 1 to 5 days before arriving in the UK. And this needs to be administered by a vet and recorded on the health certificate or the passport. But the final thing on my slide here says you must travel using an approved ferry or air routes. And most French, for example, operators do not allow pets on their ferries unless they're in a vehicle. So this means that instead of coming home with you on your boat, your pet has to travel on a ferry in a car. So I'll leave you to think about the logistics of that. I mentioned tapeworm treatment. So it's not just Great Britain actually that needs a tapeworm treatment documented. So there's a list of other countries. I'm not going to read them out to you. So there's one more thing I'd like to say about animal health certificates. And some people have used the possibility of getting an EU pet passport in Ireland. So either Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland. And this is a way of getting a lifetime passport rather than an animal health certificate every time you travel. And it's a really good thing for people who maybe travel a lot with their pets. But the pet must be registered with a vet in Ireland. And it's not necessarily practical for many pet owners to do this. Right, so I tried to summarize because I did think, wow, tonight I've got to talk about how to get from A to B and C to D and back to A. So I tried to summarize basically what the requirements are in the different transiting to different countries backwards and forwards. And so the purpley one here is the Northern Ireland, the new document. And the red routes are where you can't take your pet on your own private boat. And then the others are where you do need something, but you're allowed to take your pet on your boat with you. So hopefully I got it right. It was a lot of research went into this, and we are updating our our Cruising Association website accordingly. So you may see this again when it's been checked and verified. So what happens if you don't comply with all these rules? Well, your pet may be put into quarantine for up to 4 months, or you may be refused entry if you travel by sea, and you're responsible for any costs and charges associated with this. Very quickly, what are we doing at the Cruising Association? Well, DEFRA are responsible for the health requirements for pets coming into Great Britain. And it's not likely that a few yacht owners are going to be able to change what DEFRA have dictated about this. But we may be able to lobby the UK government and try and get us back into the EU pet passport scheme, which would be good because we would then not have to do a new health certificate every time we travel. And then Border Force are more law enforcement. So although they feel quite friendly towards pets traveling on private boats, they don't actually have much jurisdiction on this. So this is my final slide. So the conclusion is that plan ahead. Check all requirements of all countries to be visited, including your return trip. Check your documents, vaccinations, ports of entry, whether there's an authorised route that had to be taken. If you're in doubt, you could send a question, members can send a question to the Cruising Association or RATS for advice. And please do tell us about our experiences, because we learn a lot from our members about what actually happens in real life, in practice. A few useful information links and tips, and that's it. So I think I might have overrun slightly, so sorry. But I'd like to introduce to you Rick, who is our electrical guru, and he's absolutely brilliant at making really complicated electrical things nice and simple. So I look forward to your talk, Rick.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Tania, for those kind comments. But I think what I'm going to say is much simpler than what you've just tried to explain to us, but I think you did a good job on that. So anyway, yes, low voltage electrics on small craft. I want to talk about three aspects of that this evening. And these are, first of all, I'll tell you about a model that we developed in RATS for estimating battery energy consumption. I want to tell you about some issues we've come across regarding the retrofitting of lithium chemistry batteries to boats. And thirdly, I just want to talk about the technical basics of electrics and a guide that we've been writing or have already written, and you will already see some of it. But let's move on. So the model, why have we done a model? Firstly, we really, all of us, don't like to run our engines when we're at anchor or on a mooring, when we're off grid. But we really like to know to balance our the usage of our electricity to the input from solar panels and so on. So, and it's quite difficult to do that in some ways because there's so many issues involved. So what we looked at a model which will look at various boating activities, which I'll come to, take an input of the current draw that you're using for your various bits of equipment, and gives the output of the total energy consumption that you model in your various scenarios. We put some defaults in there, which I'll come to, but you can override those defaults. And we've also included in the model the inputs that you might have from solar, wind, and hydro generators. So I'm just going to show you a few examples of what's in the model. And this first page shows a summary of the user data entry. The first thing is to say something you put into the model what your battery is. Is it 12 volt or could be 24 volt? We're not covering 48 volts or anything bigger, which might be used with electric propulsion, for example, but most small craft have 12, with some of the bigger ones 24. You then put in your service battery type, and we can choose lead acid or lithium. And I should say, when I say lithium tonight, I really mean lithium ion batteries, ION, and specifically lithium iron phosphate batteries, lithium IRON phosphate batteries, which are the most common ones used on small craft. But I might just say lithium for the point of brevity. So you put in the battery type and the service battery capacity, how many amp hours in the battery that you have on in your battery bank. Then you can choose from any one of 3 activity profiles, or you can choose 2 or 3 if you want to. And in summary, you put in, so you have a day sailing one, this is the blue one on the left-hand side. And you might say you're sailing for 5 hours in daylight and 1 hour at night. You then have below that, the activity profile when anchored, but it really is off grid. This is when you're at anchor on a mooring, whatever, you're relying on self-sufficiency to power your batteries. And you then can say how many hours you're anchored in daylight and at night. And thirdly, there's a passage plan, which is saying that activity profile when you're on passage. So how many days are you going to be at sea and how many hours of darkness you're going to have per day. And the model does actually allow for 24 hours of darkness a day for those who sail in the Arctic in winter. Not many of us, perhaps, but it's possible. Jumping straight to the summary, on the right-hand side of the results. You can choose any one of those 3 profiles that you want to include in your results through tick boxes, yes, yes, or no. This one shown you here says we're not worried about the on passage. We're looking at a day's sailing and anchoring. And that gives you a total output energy usage. Just an example here is saying that you're using more than you're generating with this particular, whatever is modeled in this particular case. And you've got so much battery capacity remaining. Then going a little bit deeper into it, for each of those activity profiles, we have got the equipment that we have on board. That's shown down the left-hand side there. And there's more actually in the model. I haven't included them all on here, but the first sort of bunch of pieces of equipment there on the left-hand side are the instruments, navigation instruments, and so on. And then the bottom, we've got the other systems you might have on board. Just to explain this, and I'm trying to do this very quickly, clearly tonight, but the first, let's look at the middle section, selected values. If you don't put anything into the left-hand section, says user override, then you would just have defaults in there. These are all the defaults set up in the model, typical values it might get for what each of these pieces of equipment is drawing in terms of amps. And I'll come to the percentage bit in a moment. But if, as you look on there on the left-hand side, you can put in some user override figures, which if you think the defaults are not correct for your boat, then you put in some override figures. Just to explain the percentages then, just going, the simplest one to explain that is at the bottom, fridge there. We all know if we run our fridge, it will take, I've just used an example here, 7 amps draw from your fridge. Some might be more, some might be less, but it switches itself on and off with the thermostat. So it's not always on. And this part of the model, the default says well, it's on for 30% of the time. But you might say, no, I don't run my fridge that much. I don't have it so cold. So it's only 20% of the time, but it goes on and off. And the same applies to anything else in there. Navigation instruments might be on 100% of the time, potentially. But so that's that part of the model. On the right-hand side, then, for the results all by individual item and summarizing to give us the total amp hours per day that are being consumed. Similarly, for the charging processes, the examples here I have given are for, well, the charging processes are for solar panels, wind and hydro generators. We're not including charging from the engine, which is, if you've got plenty of fuel, it's limitless. But as I said, we don't really want to be running our engine if we're off grid, just at anchor if we don't have to. It's not very good for the environment, it's noisy and not very good for the engine actually either. Because diesel engines anyway should be run under load, I'm sure most of you know. But that, again, we've got selected values in the middle, which are the default values. And then left-hand side, we can override those values. And that gives us, on the right, the total charging in amp hours. There's one of these pages for each of the activity profiles, so you can model it and change it as you want to. And that's the whole point of a model. It is to try what ifs. And you never get it perfectly accurate. I mean, how are you going to know how many hours of sunlight you're going to get on a particular day, or how much wind you're going to get? But you can model it and say, what would happen if I was anchored on a fairly calm day with just a bit of sun? And you'd see then just what sort of level of energy consumption you'd have. And this could be useful not only for your existing boat system, but if you were thinking about changing your batteries, upgrading maybe to a bigger battery bank or whatever, to try and match your requirements to the amount of battery capacity you want to put in. But it is a model and you try what ifs. It doesn't necessarily give you a perfect answer. So where we are with the model is a beta version under test. There have been a few members who volunteered to test it, and we've had some reasonably positive feedback from that. But we're hoping to make it available to whole membership soon, and so you can watch out for newsletters or updates. But if there's anybody online tonight or in the audience here would like to try it out now, then if you just email rats@theca.org.uk, we can make it available to you. So, and I should say to members, of course. So I hope that might encourage a few others to join tonight. So that's all for the model. Sorry, it's such a very brisk run through, but a limited time makes that necessary. I just want to talk about some of the issues now with lithium batteries, because some of you might run the model, say, I want to put a bigger battery bank in, how much do I need? Perhaps I should use lithium batteries. But we're getting reports that insurers are refusing cover for DIY conversions. And we at RATS actually do want to preserve the right of recreational boaters to do DIY on their boats, to do their own installations, provided they do it properly. And that's the question, really. Insurers require a professional to do the work, so it says, but don't define what a professional means. And we tend to think what we should be arguing for is someone who's competent and follows the right procedures and the right standards and does a safe system. And the other question is that does replacing lead acid batteries with lithium batteries constitute a major change on the boat? And if it does constitute a major change, as some articles and publications are suggesting, then a post-construction assessment could be required under the recreational craft rules, the UK regulations, or other recreational craft regulations in the UK, recreational craft directives in Europe. So let's have a look at some of those points further. This is an excerpt from Pantanius website, so it's just straight off their website. I'm not going to go through every point here, but the first one, see, it says should be installed by professionals. That's important. And the bottom one, equally important, insurers should be informed about the use of lithium batteries. Some of the points quite sensible, fire systems, fire extinguishers, and so on. The fourth one down is interesting, though. Lithium batteries should not be combined with other types of batteries. And we sort of asked the question, well, it would be quite sensible to have lithium battery bank as your main house banks, providing all your services, and to have a lead acid battery for your starter battery. The lead acid batteries have a better characteristic for very high current draw for a short time, which is what starter motors need. And so is that combining them? Is it what constitutes them being combined? And we don't know all the answers to this. We have had some conversations with one of the major insurers, and they are quite sympathetic to our views on this, but I think they don't quite know how to deal with it at the moment. But what are the risks? Well, the risks are actually quite small. The lithium iron phosphate batteries, they're stable. They're not really liable to catch fire as some other battery chemistries are. But it is essential that they're installed properly with a good battery management system. And some of these come with built-in battery management systems anyway. And the insurers accept, and we see it in publicity, that the risks are far greater from water toys on boats, or small watercraft and gadgets. And you get a lot of these on the larger super yachts and so on. And they have been the result, they have caused fires. But all I can say is if you have recently had a lithium battery installed, or you've done it yourself, particularly, then consult tell your insurer. If you're planning to do it, I recommend that you do consult your insurer first. And I think they will be quite reasonable about it, provided you can prove that it's done competently, or maybe you've had it checked over by what they would consider to be a professional. And also, you might like to get hold of this ISO standard from listed there, which has only been in draft till recently, but we've just heard this last week or so. It's been issued in its final form. It's not expensive, I think £80 or something. So you might like to think about getting a copy of that. Yes, the other point, does it constitute a requirement, major change requiring a post-construction assessment? Well, if you boat was on the market before 16th of June 1998, then no, it's not covered, so it was out of scope anyway. Our view is that yes, it could represent a major change to convert to lithium, but probably doesn't in most cases. But looking at the rules, the RCD and RCR rules, it's not very clear. Maybe the rules haven't quite caught up. I don't know that, but it's one of the things we're looking at. In the UK, trading standards are responsible for policing this, but their action has to be reasonable. And probably it's not going to be an issue, and it would never be an issue until you're thinking about selling the boat or some major event like that, or maybe possibly reinsuring. But it's just really to bear in mind these points. But we are investigating, and we hope we can report more on this in due course. Just finally, technical basics of 12-volt electrics. It sort of, we realized, Rat's group was discussing this, that there are a number of people, very competent sailors, very, very able, who perhaps for whatever reason just don't have the technical background or experience to understand the basic 12-volt systems on their boat, 24-volt systems. And it is quite important that you should have some understanding, because it's, from a safety point of view, it's also quite good to learn about these things and know how your boat systems work. So what we've done is to, this will be a first of a series of technical basics articles on a number of topics, but we started with 12-volt electrics. And some of you have read your members who've read your March issue of Cruising will have seen part 1 of the technical basics. Part 2 will be there in June, and that will follow on, will be all on the CA's website in due course. And what we're covering in there are these key topics. So what's a volt, what's an amp, what's a watt, what do amp hours mean, what are the risks of 12 volts, and about batteries and how to manage batteries safely. And some of you listening may be thinking, well, surely this is stuff that everybody knows. I know this is so simple, so basic, but in fact, it's the whole point. It is basic, because we think that there will be many people out there who perhaps just to have a basic background, and will help them with the enjoyment of knowing about their boats and be able to perhaps improve safety on board. So I think that's me finished. Sorry if it was rushed, but we're all going through very quickly. And I'm going to hand over to Roger now, who's going to talk about development in tidal and wave renewable energy.
Thank you very much, Rick. And yeah, so continuing the electricity theme, and over the next 10-15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about some recent developments in tidal and wave generation of electricity. I'm not going to say anything about wind. It's lots of discussion about wind, but I'm going to focus on tidal and wave. Just going to give some examples of probably pre-commercial deployments, I suppose, rather than commercial deployments. I'm going to say something about the implications for yacht cruising. I'm not a technical person, but I must say I think these are some really exciting and very interesting developments in tidal and wave energy. Probably the stage which is very much at the pilot project stage is probably pre-commercial deployment. All of the examples I'm giving here are in some sort of pilot stage. They're generating electricity in a real life environment, and we're starting to see some of the implications. But it's worth saying that tidal and wave generation is always going to be complementary to wind generation. The sorts of things that we're looking at, they're probably going to be smaller scale than wind generation. You see from the numbers. I'm not going to say too much about megawatts or anything, amps or anything like that. Keep it simple, but the output of these systems probably rather less than in most wind generation systems. Wind generation systems, you're looking at up to something like 10 megawatts, maybe even more now for the very biggest ones. Here, we're looking at probably up to 2 megawatts, so quite a bit smaller. But Tidal in particular is very predictable. We know when the tides are going to run. We can look well in advance and see what the tidal currents are going to be. And wave, it not quite as predictable as the tides, but even when there's no wind, generally we get some sort of swell. And most of these things are looking at swell rather than waves. So in terms of examples, so I'll give 4 examples, and this one I think is really exciting. Is from a company called Minesto, which is originally a Swedish company, and what they've developed are underwater flying kites. So this contraption here, when it's put together, it's obviously an exploded diagram here. When it's put together, you actually get lift over that wing there, and it actually flies in the tidal current. And it only needs a tidal current of around about 2 to 4 knots to be able to fly. And it uses that hydrodynamic lift, to fly in the water above the seabed. And what's really fun about this one is that it actually flies around in a figure of 8 profile under the water. So it actually goes faster than the tidal current because it's moving around in this figure of 8 pattern. So it's actually going through the water faster than the tidal stream, which actually produces more electricity. Each device doesn't produce a huge amount of electricity, around up to 1.2 megawatts, but these things are relatively small. So that wingspan is about 12 meters. Yes, it's quite heavy. It's something like 20 tons and flying. And but these things are relatively cheap. So they're tethered to the seabed by that tether. There's a generator on board. The electricity goes down the tether and then it goes off along the seabed to the shore. And that's just an example, seeing the figure of 8 profile. And what's again another thing that's quite fun about these things is when there's no tide, and this is a question I had, when there's no tide, doesn't it just sink to the seabed, and how does it then take off again? But in fact, with the turbine blades, it can hover in the sea, above the seabed until the tidal current comes back on again when the tide turns, and it starts generating electricity again. And what's quite nice about these things is that they are under the seabed, so they tend to be at least 20 meters below the seabed. A couple of places where these things have been deployed. Big focus on the Faroe Islands. So they've got 4 of these. That's the black blobs there. In a place where there's reasonably strong tidal currents, but not huge tidal currents in the Faroe Islands, and they're looking to deploy quite a few more. So I think it's something around about 20 or 24 in that deployment in that particular location, and then they've got government funding to maybe deploy up to 100 around the Faroe Islands. And there's actually also a potential deployment in Wales off Anglesey, actually off Holy Island there, and there's one of these things being deployed on a pilot basis off Holyhead, but it's sort of got tied up in regulatory and financial issues in Wales, and so the company's been focusing much more on the Faroe Islands over the last few years. But hopefully this will move ahead in the next few years. So that's quite an exciting development. That's a Swedish company that's doing this one. The next one is a British company, Orbital Marine Power. And in a sense, this looks quite futuristic again. But actually, this solution is probably rather more conventional in that what you've got there is a long hull. The yellow thing is basically a hull which floats on the surface of the sea when it's deployed. It's on a barge here being taken out to the deployment site in the Orkney Islands, and that hull is around about 90 meters long. And then you've got the turbines on either side, and when it's properly deployed, those sort of wings for the turbines just fold down, and the turbines are properly underwater. This device, it has a little bit more capacity than the Minesto solution, but you know, this is a lot bigger. As you can see, the hull is around about 90 meters long, and this thing actually weighs 900 tons. So it's quite a big, you know, heavy, cumbersome thing, but it's you know, it is deployed in the Orkney Islands now, and is actually producing an operational amount of power. So that's the thing with the arms deployed down, and say the turbine blades under the water and anchored to the seabed. So it's got to be anchored quite firmly, you know, so it doesn't move around too much. You know, the tide moves one way or the other way, it ought to stay pretty much in the same place. So this is where it is in the Orkney Islands, in Westray Firth, which is going out towards Stronsay, and you've got Kirkwall down in the bottom. So you can see actually, you know, with one, it's not too bad, but if there were 4 of these things in this location, it would start to, you know, be something of a hazard to navigation. Particularly, you know, these are in situations where there's going to be quite a strong tidal stream in any case, for obvious reasons, and this stuff is on the surface. So that's the orbital marine power solution. Just going to look at a couple of wave-based solutions, and this one I must say I really like. This is the Core Power Ocean, which I think is a Finnish company, and it's buoy-based. Now these buoys are actually quite big, so I think they're about 20 meters tall, which for a buoy is, you know, is really quite a big thing, around about 10 meters diameter. So they're quite big buoys. And the electricity capacity of each buoy is not huge. It's around about 300. No, sorry, that's a mistake there. That should be kilowatts, I think. There shouldn't be. The 300 megawatts will be huge. So yeah, take that as an error. And at the moment, there's actually only one of these things being deployed. It's been deployed off northern Portugal, but I'd expect lots of swell off Portugal. And really, this is generating electricity in the swell rather than waves as such. So that's an interior look, and it's actually a linear generator. So those arms move up and down in the swell in response to the buoy going up and down in the waves. So it's quite a simple, you know, device inside. So whilst each individual buoy may not generate that much energy, you know, once you potentially get lots of these things in deployed maybe inside a wind farm, then you could actually be looking at quite considerable amounts of energy being produced. Each buoy, although it's quite big, is relatively cheap. So the electricity is generated from this linear generator inside the buoy, and it basically is anchored, and the electricity is transmitted down, you know, that cable to the anchor point, and then along the seabed again. So that's Core Power Ocean, and I think quite interesting. I could see these coming along quite soon alongside wind farms, you know, as a possibility of giving more predictable energy generation through buoy-based wave power. This is a final one, is another energy wave energy solution, and this is a solution which has basically panels which are fixed to the seabed, and they rock from backwards and forwards in the waves as the waves come through. So it's really the surge of the waves. It's not breaking waves, but as the waves come through, you know, you've got the rotating motion of the wave, and these panels rock backwards and forwards. And here I've got the numbers right. So each panel has a capacity of something between 350 kilowatts up to a megawatt. And there's 4 of these things off the coast of Portugal, and they've been out there for a couple of years. Oh, it's worth saying in relation to the previous one, Core Power, that they're quite proud that these things have been deployed in quite rough conditions off Portugal, and they've survived waves of up to something like 18 meters. Quite windy and wavy conditions, and these things have survived quite well. I'll just say a few words about the implications for yacht cruising. And firstly, were saying that the Minesto solution, the first thing that I showed, the underwater flying kite thing, they are designed to be no nearer the surface than 20 meters. So from a yacht cruising perspective, that's great, because it shouldn't interfere with us at all. Might interfere with fishing boats, it might interfere with large scale shipping, but from a yacht cruising perspective, hopefully that shouldn't have too many implications for us. And it's not just the Minesto solution, there's a Dutch company, Sea Current, that's doing a similar sort of thing, and these things are underneath the surface, so that's, from a yacht cruising perspective, that's great. But all the other things I've been looking at are surface located, such as the orbital power thing, the very long sort of submarine type thing, currently located in the Orkneys, and those things, they could be quite a hazard to navigation, particularly if you start getting 3 or 4 of these things in quite constrained areas where there's lots of tide, and you could start to have situations where it could be quite tricky to avoid them. So that is something that we need to look out for. With these other ones, core power and the wave roller, the panels that flap backwards and forwards, going to be looking much more at multiple solutions with arrays of these things. So whilst each individual buoy here isn't going to be too much of a hazard, but you can see from the picture they're potentially quite close together, and so they could be something which would impact our navigation. So these things, they work and they're being deployed. What's holding up the deployment of these solutions is pretty much the regulatory and the financial issues at the moment, not the technology. So we are likely to see these solutions coming into our waters fairly soon. RATS will be keeping an eye on these developments as they come through, and if there's a need to lobby in order to preserve our right of navigation, I'm sure that's something that we'll be doing. But anyway, just something for us to think about as yacht cruising people. So I'm now going to carry on with the navigation hazards theme. Well, I'm not, but I'm going to hand over to John, and John's going to take us through Orca interactions. Okay.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Roger. Yes, so potential hazard. I mean, we need sustainable electricity, but some of that will be potentially a hazard. And this is another potential hazard. So we're 5 seasons on, and Orca are still doing this. They're still damaging yacht rudders across the Bay of Biscay and off the Atlantic coasts of Spain and Portugal. And they're still sinking a few. We had, and how many we're talking about? Well, the good news is last season, the number of interactions was down about 30%, but we still had 2 boats sunk. So they've sunk 2 boats every year for the last 3 years. So far, there have been about 380 boats damaged by Orca over the 5 years. The nature of the damage has changed very slightly, that they now see that there are 62% where there's no damage. That's the reports, the last 100 reports we've had. It was half that for the first 100, and the number seriously damaged was twice what it was last year. Whereabouts? Right, don't look at the detail on here. It's the symbolic bit. The blue symbols with a white dot means that that's a report. If you go on our website, the Cruising Association website, and you press on a blue with a white dot, you will get the full detailed report from the skipper. Off the northwest coast of Galicia, there are 53 in that orange, sort of yellowy orange symbol. If you press on that, you can keep going down to all 53 and choose the one you want. 115 off Gibraltar. So on the Cruising Association website, all the details there. What's the behavior? Remember, these orca are a protected species. I'll probably say that again later, but their behavior spans curiosity, and we're getting more of that where they're checking the boats out, to violent attacks without any warning at all. Usually it's one orca comes in really hard and smashes the rudder, and it varies. The interactions last over a period of time. One unlucky crew had 3 visitations. They did some damage, swam away, came back again, did some more damage, swam away, came back a 3rd time. So it really varies. There's no predictor on what their behavior is likely to be, and we don't know, and the numbers as well. Often if there's a number, if the juveniles are doing the damage, an adult will stand off and be communicating as if giving them the juveniles instructions, and day and night. We're also still collecting data on uneventful passages. These are yachts that go through the affected waters but have no problem. We've got over 400 reports now, and what we're trying to do is compare what was it different about the lucky ones and the unlucky ones, and that's enabled us to refute a number of theories and a number of ideas. For example, colour of anti-fouling. We've still got our partnership with GTOA. They are the Spanish marine biologists, Spanish and Portuguese marine biologists, who've been studying these orca, the protected orca. It's one family, one population that are doing this. They've been studying them for decades, so they know them all. They've got photographs of them all. They know the relationships. We've had a really effective relationship since 2022 with them, where we share data, and we're in regular touch, probably a couple of times a month. Really, it's really been supportive, an excellent relationship. We provide the sailing expertise, they provide the scientific expertise. Why do they do it? Well, everybody now believes that it's most likely that they just enjoy playing with yachts. But it's possible that when they're directing juveniles, that they're practicing disabling tuna. The bluefin tuna is their prey, and they bite the tail of the bluefin tuna to slow it down. So it might be. It's only only a thought. So if you're going to sail in the area, what do? Well, prepare. And what sort of preparation do you do? Well, start before you go. First of all, is avoid the most active periods, and I'll show you how you do that. Decide on what deterrents you're going to use, and then brief your crew. Treat it like stormy weather, man overboard. These are risks that we all face when we go sailing, and we prepare for them. Right, this is the first thing that the Cruising Association does for you. On our site, we've got this table. Now, the horizontal lines are different parts of the affected seas, from the Bay of Biscay to Gibraltar Straits, and the vertical are the years for each of the 12 months. If it's green, that means that there wasn't an interaction that month in that location. So you can see a lot of green areas. So in those months, in those parts of the sea, you're highly, highly unlikely to meet an orca. So think about using that to guide you as to when you're going to sail in a particular area. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as part of your planning as well, GTOA, our partner, have on their website traffic lights, and these are current, and they tell you if it's red, you've got orca around and likely to be high risk. If it's green, it's safe to be in those waters. So this is part of your preparation, choosing where to go, when to go. Then you've also got 2 apps, particular GT Orcas, that's part of GTOA, and Orkinus. And this is where people are reporting sightings in green, near misses in brownie, and actual damage from orcas in red. And these are live. You've also got Facebook sites. Orca Attack Reports is one of the most active, where people are reporting sightings that incidents now. And so if you're thinking about sailing in an area, from this information, you know where the orca are. Right, part of your preparation, what are you going to do? What we've done is we've got nearly 150 or so reports, and the Cruising Association has edited them down. You can see the word noise. Next to that is sand. Next to that is motoring, reversing. If you press on any of those, then what you get is the skipper's reports where they've explained what they did in that particular. So if it's noise, they explain what sounds they tried and whether they worked or not. So this is on the Cruising Association, and it's called the comments library. You've also got to say yeah, so that's an example of the report. I'm going to move on. The safety protocol is also on there. That gives you a whole series of steps to take if it goes wrong, if you get interaction. And what we're saying is brief your crew on these. Next thing, decide on what deterrents. There are only 2 legal ones now at the moment because of the risk to these protected animals. Loud noise, foghorns, banging metal objects, that works on some occasions. Sand works occasionally. It's a bag of sand, pour it round the rudder, and that disturbs their sonar picture of the rudder. So if they're swimming in, pour some sand round, and that's worked for many boats. Not every time, but it has worked. So before you go, decide, are you going to have either of these deterrents on board? Once again, brief the crew. Right, so you've decided, you know when you're setting off, and you're going in an area where there might be orca, because you've seen that. So I'll brief the crew. Right, monitor the traffic lights and the apps I talked about earlier, because they're live. That's happening all the time. So when you're at sea, so you're monitoring them. If you're in the area where the orca are, get into shallow water. There have been no interactions in less than 20 meters of water and close to the shore. However, the conditions have got to let you go there, and you've got rocks and fishing pots, masses of fishing pots on the Portuguese coast, as anybody who sailed there knows. So we recommend, if you're going to do that, go in daylight. The other advantage is if something does go wrong in daylight, it's much easier for the life-saving services. Okay, so you're really prepared, you're feeling lucky, you're doing all this. It happened. They came and they decided to start damaging your boat. What do you do? Right, the first one is you either stop, we advise, or you motor away. Yeah, that's tricky. And at the moment, we can't advise which to do. Some scientists say stop, because that calms the orca down, reduces their adrenaline. Other scientists say, if it's the juveniles that are attacking your rudder, the chances are that they're part of a bigger pod, and the rest of the pod are feeding. So if you motor away quickly, the juveniles won't follow. And the answer at the moment is, what we found is that some boats have tried each of those, and for some it's worked and for some it hasn't. What we're going to do is carry on collecting data and knowledge and try and get to a point where we can say, under these circumstances, try this. If it was me and I was closest to shallow water and shore, I would motor away as quickly as possible to get into shallow water, because I know that's going to be safe. Let go of the steering so you don't break your arm. Reverse is another option that works quite often. Loud noise and sand we talked about, and the protocol also. And then please report the interaction, no matter how it went. So that's on the Cruising Association database. So it's useful for researchers, the press, and other sailors in the future. So that's the advice. Be prepared. Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand it over to Simon.
Thank you very much, all of you. I now just want to quickly touch on a few bits and pieces about what we're doing. Our members tell us they value our ability to answer their questions, and this shows the questions that have been asked per year. Obviously, we had a peak just after Brexit, and things are dying down to a normal level now. 2025 is obviously the years to date. By far, the largest number of questions relate to VAT issues, closely followed by Schengen 9180 issues. VAT is often complicated in their nature and sometimes very difficult to answer without the full details of the history of the boats. We also welcome questions on other topics, please. I'll touch on some of the regulatory topics that we're dealing with. A lot of people are applying for long-term visas, and combining them with the standard 90 and 180-day allowance could allow them 9 months in the country. This opens a risk of becoming tax resident in that country. The RATS-VAT group have published a decision tree discussing these issues. We're rewriting various web pages as we learn more and conditions change. Marine protected areas are growing in size and scope. We're exploring ways we can keep members informed about the restrictions that impact cruising sailors' activities. Our reservist colleague Ian Wilson is working with other organisations to try to get UK legislation on the marking of lobster pot ends to reduce the number of vessel entanglements, RNLI call-outs, and damage to boats and crew. The Scottish Parliament have already introduced laws to do this. We're working with the Scottish Parliament, RYA Scotland, and other groups to challenge the proposal to impose a conservancy fee within the Clyde Port area. That's the pink area on the chart. It's unprecedented in the area it will cover, and it's far from clear what, if any, services leisure craft users would receive in return. We're exploring ways we might influence governments to allow UK citizens a full 6-month stay in the EU without the need for a visa. This might be challenging given the current geopolitical situation. We engage with consultations where we feel the proposals might have a negative impact on our activities, such as speed trials and floating wind farms. There's a speed trial in Harwich at the moment. I'll draw your attention to a couple of topics on this list. GRP boats can last for over 40 years using the same propulsion system. Decarbonising the fleet would take decades, even if every new boat launched today had electric propulsion. HVO or hydrotreated vegetable oil offers a clean drop-in replacement to mineral diesel with a significantly reduced CO2 footprint. We're working with the RYA, Inland Waterways Group, and the British Marine to lobby the government to allow HVO to be sold to the seagoing leisure market. And it looks quite promising at the moment. We're concerned about the withdrawal of paper charts by UKHO, IMRE, and other national hydrographic offices when all our chart plotters display a not for the navigation notice. We're lobbying hard to get an affordable electronic charting system in place that covers the needs of the leisure market.